Over its history, America has had a number of great preachers. They're not the only ones, of course. There are many great preachers around the world and throughout history. But today we're looking at the first sermon preached in America. Before we get going, though, two things to note. One, don't forget to like or subscribe, as it helps the channel out. But in particular, this video, I want to give thanks to my friend Thomas Kidd, Distinguished Professor of History over at Baylor, a wonderful historian on these matters. And if you want to know more about this period or about any of the time of American church history, I always recommend Kidd's books. And there are a couple of affiliate links down in the description if you want to find out more. But the context of the first sermon in America is actually during the time of the Mayflower. Now, it might surprise you to know that the Mayflower actually didn't send any clergy with it. Those who had backed the Mayflower in the first pilgrims to come over were actually businessmen, we might say, today. They had heard about the lucrative discoveries of gold and other things in South America when Spain and Portugal were there, and they thought at least there might be some, albeit speculative, but some opportunity to have the same thing in North America. So the folks that were sent over were primarily tasked with discovering goods that can be shipped back. By the time of the first sermon, though, there had not been any return on the investment of those who had sent the Mayflower over. There was a great deal of consternation, in fact, about what to make of this colonial expansion. And so in 1621, a new ship had been sent over, and on that ship was a man by the name of Robert Cushman. Cushman had been one of the organizers of the original Mayflower voyage, in fact. He had served in Leiden over in the Netherlands with the separatist groups from 1617 to 1620, and so he was a natural ally, you might say, to the Plymouth Colony. And so in 1621, Cushman arrives by the ship known as Fortune, a bit on the nose, you might say, given that he was coming to see what was going on with the colony. He needed the investors to remain happy in order to protect the colony itself. There was a great deal of stress, though, when Cushman arrived. In part, he felt because there had been no clergy to remind the folks of their commitment to God. Cushman himself was only a deacon. He actually had no training in pastoral ministry and had never, at least according to our records, preached a sermon before. And yet, the need he felt was great enough. And so, on the 9th of December, 1621, Cushman preached what we know today to be the first sermon on American soil. Of course, it's not America yet by any standard of measurement, historically or otherwise. But there in the Plymouth Colony, he preached a sermon with the frankly rather boring title of, quote, "A Sermon Preached at Plymouth in New England." Now, of course, we're certainly not saying that this is the best sermon ever preached, but it is the first. And its context is the early days of the American colonies. In fact, the very earliest days when the Plymouth folks arrived, and under a great deal of stress to return the investment of those back in England, they seemed to be on the verge of failing, or at least not returning that investment. But these circumstances eventually themselves led to the first sermon preached on this soil.